Greetings and salutations. This is Abe Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also become a bitter pill or a spoonful of sugar, or soon to a theater and drive in near you. You could become the medicine going down with a new tier, coming out this summer. And as always, you can visit us on patreon.com/The Bitter Truth, where you can get some great stuff and all of that. We're on all the usual platforms, Spotify, iTunes, name it. If you listen to podcasts at all, you know where to go to get them. Also, the Bitter Truth channel on YouTube. I'm working to get more subscribers on there, so if you could help me out, that would be great. I don't really push that channel as much, though I should, and so I'm doing it. But anyway, today I'm by myself for a little bit and thought I'd kind of ruminate over the excuse me, I'm already thirsty. And by the way, those of you I'm recording at home who keep sending me little texts about whether or not I'm drinking beer anymore, I'm drinking scotch and soda because guess what? I'm at home. So there's that. Anyway, the demonstrations that have been going on in the wake of the George Floyd murder by Officer Derek Chauvin and three other guys who are all charged now has sparked quite a bit of rage in various communities and cities. And as usual, the folks that like to think there is no racism, rather than blaming the problem, blame looters. And you're like, all right, well, that's genius. But I'm calling this show today American Intifada. And I know that sounds incendiary, and I ran it by a few of my friends, and I was kind of concerned about how that sounded and blah, blah, blah. But I'm not necessarily calling for a revolt, although we're going to have one. If you think we're not, you're not paying attention. But let's examine the word intifada for a second, because, what I like a lot of about Arabic words, and being, Palestinian on my dad's side, I grew up with some of them, is how people have a tendency to just clutch their pearls and freak out. Like if you say you're going to go jihad on somebody sarcastically, well, jihad is holy war. And if you're not religious and you use that kind of ironically, then it's supposed to be funny. Or if someone's like, they're going to declare a fatwa on you, which, is kind of a Muslim cleric version of a divinely ordained hit or an assassination attempt. But if you say that sarcastically, it just is what it is. In this sense, I don't mean intifada sarcastically. The definition, an intifada is an Arabic word. The definition is tremor, shiver, shuddering, shake. And so if you know anything about the Middle East or the Palestine-Israel issue or any of that, and I've had people on this show before talk about the formation of Israel and, all of the issues going back into the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, 20th centuries, 21st centuries now. So I'm not going to get into all of that here today, but just suffice it to say, Israel got started in 1948. Flash forward 40 years later, 1988, despite a bunch of property being taken and settlements being illegally built, the Israeli-occupied West Bank experienced the first intifada, which was an accident. An Israeli troop truck crashed into a Palestinian truck full of day laborers, killed some guys. And that was all it took. And bam, that lasted 6 years, which ended up, being highlighted by the Oslo Accords between Israel and the PLO, which, if you know anything about the Oslo Accords, it was kind of, I think Arafat had basically outlived his usefulness at all, if he had any. But he made out like a bandit. His cronies made out like a bandit. The Oslo Accords screwed the Palestinian people, and as it unfolded, people saw they got screwed. But I bring that up to just to describe the powder keg that lit the first Intifada, and which was more successful than the second Intifada, which is a whole nother deal. And if you listen to my show with Shaul Magid, Jewish studies professor out of Dartmouth, a couple of weeks back, he went into some of that detail. Then let's look at World War I. I used to make jokes about Archduke Ferdinand when I was doing stand-up. in that he wasn't even a duke; he was just a vice duke. So how does that guy start World War I? We're just easily offended. But in reality, after some unexpected turns, he was in line for the throne of Austria, the Austria-Hungary region, or Austria-Hungary as it was called. And the throne was held by his brother, who was assassinated in June of 1914. And, again, I'm not going to get into the whole saga of the Austria-Hungary conflict with, the Brits and the Prussians and everybody else, Germany. But they'd spent years maneuvering to make sure that, they were going to be in good position to, work with the new king and everything. And then, so Archduke Ferdinand was, he was in line. And anyway, he got assassinated in 1914. And so that's kind of what started World War I, which lasted like 5 years. And the United States didn't get into it until 1917. And again, I've gone over this with some of the guests before. I won't get into all those details. So why all this? Why all this run up? Why all this powder keg talk? Well, what I'm seeing with the George Floyd scenario, he's not the first black or brown person to have been murdered by police on video. Philando Castile, Eric Gardner, I can't breathe. So George Floyd wasn't even the first guy to say, I can't breathe. He wasn't the first guy to call for his mom. It was probably, I don't know, 300 snuff films we've had in the last decade, 100, I don't know how many, but to see people getting killed on camera, being strangely okay with it. But we're a country now that is used to the mass shooting of toddlers, so I shouldn't be surprised. But fucking A, we have had systemic racism in this country, and this is really geared at people who I know aren't going to hear this, but this is geared at people who think we don't have racism, or I hear that shit all the time. And when you try to explain that we do have racism, they clutch their pearls and they're completely shocked and like, well, slavery ended 150 years ago. What more do they want? Those assholes, I can guarantee you two things. Number one, no black people whatsoever, and or they have not heard any personal stories from any of their friends or understand Jim Crow laws, the private prison system that was formalized and made into a science after the omnibus crime bill that Joe Biden pushed through in 1994. He could not get it passed under George H.W. Bush. So he finally got it pushed through under Bill Clinton, who was trying really, really hard to be a fucking Republican. Success. So, but anyway, in the U.S., we had, this country was founded on free labor. This country was founded by taking land that did not belong to people, white people, and having that land worked by slaves. An example I like to use is around 1804, when the Haitians were granted their independence from France. The caveat was they had to pay about 80% of their GDP to France for about 100 years. Now imagine if the United States paid reparations to Britain for loss of income, which is what the Haitians did to the French. Imagine that happened the first 100 years of this country. Where would we be? We probably would be a big giant version of Haiti. I can't talk today. Haiti. So, the Constitution mandated that a black person was 3/5 of a human being. And it wasn't as much as, in my opinion, it wasn't so much as a racial hatred issue as much as it was a tax issue. Because if you're counting assets, your slaves were an asset, right? So anyway, that's just my personal opinion. The way the country was formed, like I said, by taking land from the Indians. George Washington was the first real estate speculator. Let's look at what he did. If you guys remember your lessons from school, he was a surveyor, and they always showed him in those 1700 knickers, with his ponytail and his vest, and he's got a telescope and he's looking out into the land, into the mountains. And he was basically surveying land, marking it up, drawing up deeds, recording the deeds, selling it to other white guys. And then the white guys would have Indian patrols, is what they call them. And those Indian patrols which was other white guys with guns, poor white guys with guns, that you talked into being superior to the Indian, thus they deserve to die if they don't play ball, would go chase Indians off the land that Washington stole and then sold. So you're really selling stolen property, which is probably why a lot of times in some legal books, you'll see property be defined as theft. And I think that's kind of the reason, because initially it was stolen from somebody and then we formalized it. Excuse me. So flash forward, and this was the real estate speculation of the day, right? So now flash forward, 200, 300, 400 years, and we've gotten what we've gotten. If you know anything about anything, civil rights movement and all that, then you know that we've had racism in this country. And so what was this? Why was George Floyd so different? Why was this such a different deal? Why did this particular video, Philando Castile got shot on video. His daughter was sitting in the back seat. He went to reach for his registration. He was plugged 7 times by a cop who freaked out, which, little side note, he was also a card-carrying member of the NRA. I have no idea why the NRA would not jump all over this like white on right. Well, I'm sorry. Yes, I do. It's because Philando Castile was black. Excuse me while I take another sip. So in any case, so we flash forward to this, to this summer, this film. We already had a couple of months of people staying home, not by force, but we had the lockdown because of COVID, with no UBI, because we don't do that in this country. No payroll guarantees. Instead, our glorious Congress and knothead president of the United States, instead of guaranteeing payroll to companies, decided to give companies the money directly and then burden the system with unemployment, not all of whom got unemployment. And for the first time ever in the history of unemployment, they extended it out to contractors and 1099 people, which was generous if they could get it, if the site wasn't crashing. So now you've got loss of income, what was called essential workers, not getting much more pay, but to risk their lives, Amazon workers, grocery store workers, and then no medical, because we don't have a Medicare for all system. Instead, the geniuses at the DNC, Democrats, decided to open the exchanges. Well, if you don't have a job and you don't have any money, what is opening the exchanges going to do? And then Nancy Pelosi comes up with the genius idea of subsidizing COBRA payments to those who lost their job. How about you pay the doctors directly through Medicare for all versus giving your donors at Aetna and Blue Cross that money, with which they'll decide who's covered and who's not, like they've always done, which is why the irony is we have the best healthcare system in the world. And the worst possible is that? Well, because we have middlemen who are not doctors deciding who's covered and who's not covered for what. Okay. So you've got this, again, another powder keg, and then the Floyd video surfaces. And I'm not going to say it wasn't gruesome. I'm not sure of it in terms of ratings. I'd watched it twice, and I'm not sure in terms of rating of gruesomeness. It was worse than Philando Castile or worse than watching Eric Gardner getting choked out. Watching a man die on video is not entertaining. I mean, it is for some people. When we were kids and we had VHS back in the 1900s, there was a series called Faces of Death, and it was on VHS. I think you can see it on YouTube now. I haven't watched this crap in a long time. It was always at my buddy's brothers or my buddy's house, and their older brother, hey, let's watch Faces of Death. And you're trying to be cool when you kind of sit through it, and you're 13 years old in the 8th grade. You don't know shit, but you're watching these guys die on camera. That's what we have now with our police force. So long story short, this thing just sparked off a revolt almost. I mean, no one is going home. It's almost every weekend now. And it's been going on a month and a half. Usually when something goes down, Sandra Bland or Freddie Gray or any of these situations, there's protests for a few days, maybe 5. But this has been like every weekend. And so this is where people, have completely just lost patience with the system. The very slaveholders who lost, slaves in the 1900s or 1800s rather, were they got paid reparations. So when people say reparations, we paid reparations. Well, we promised every slave 40 acres and a mule when they were freed. They never got that. Black people never got 40 acres and a mule. But who got restored and made whole were slave owners by the government of the United States, and they were paid to be made whole. The Jim Crow laws that came out after the 13th Amendment 14th Amendment. The 13th Amendment had language that, and if you ever never read the 13th Amendment, I'm not going to read it to you here. But basically, convicted criminals are still allowed to work for free, even though we've made slavery illegal. And in 1994, as I said earlier, it got formalized under the Clinton administration because the omnibus crime bill allows for private prisons. It allows for those prisons to contract to manufacturers to make stuff. Everything from AT&T phones, Victoria's Secret, Army boots, call centers. Mike Bloomberg's campaign got busted for using call centers that were prison labor. California, famously, under Kamala Harris, 40% of California state firefighters are nonviolent prisoners who, get paid $1 an hour to fight fires. They're trained as EMTs. They're trained as firefighters. But what happens? They get out of jail. They can't get they can't get a job with an agency because they have a prior, they have felonies. So now they can't do that, which is ridiculous. The over-militarized police force. I don't know if you've noticed, but when I was a kid, LAPD was about the only police force in the United States that had a tank. NYPD didn't have a tank. Chicago didn't have a tank. Daryl Gates famously used his tank. He was itching to use it because, we're all boys at the end of the day. We like to use the toys we were given. There was this situation with Patty Hearst in the 70s. The Symbionese Liberation Army is who kidnapped her. And, she robbed a few banks and all of that. She had safely made her exit out of the SLA. That's what they were called. And in Linwood, California, the LAPD, along with fuck ton of SWAT and everything else, took a tank and mowed down a house that had the Symbionese Liberation Army hiding out in it and just chocked it full of tear gas. And, every one of those people were killed because they tried to shoot their way out of it, which was really kind of stupid. But anyway, they got killed. But flash forward 1997, the National Defense of America Authorization Act, the NDAA, came out in 1997, and it allowed for military-grade weapons to be sold at fire sale prices or given for free to local PDs. Now, you got to understand, the Omnibus Crime Bill in 94 provided $30 billion to state and local agencies, $20 billion to the states, and $10 billion extra to the Fed. That was just the first round of cash. Now, flash forward a few years later, we're giving these people an opportunity to buy military-grade weapons. That's why you see these guys dressed like they're invading Kabul, because they have military-grade flak jackets, everything that you could possibly use to take over a small city, these guys do. And they're not trained to de-escalate. And why is that? A lot of it has to do with the fact that they're trained in fucking Israel, which means they can actually go to Israel on a field trip paid for by, guess who? Us. And they're taught by soldiers how to subdue people who are not, quote, cooperating with the government. So protesters. They show their cops what they do in Gaza. They show their cops what they do in the West Bank. They show their cops how they hassle citizens. That knee move that Derek Chauvin employed was an Israeli IDF move. That's not an American trained. It's supposed to be illegal. It's a chokehold, basically. They did it anyway. So all of that to say, we have to stop, militarizing our police and then expecting a different result. We don't train our guys to de-escalate anymore. I don't know if you've been watching the protests, but they haven't been catching a ton of looters. And I'll probably mention that a couple of times in the next few minutes here. But they haven't caught a ton of looters. They've caught, a bunch of protesters. They've arrested a bunch of protesters. They beat the shit out of a ton of protesters. But I haven't seen them really arrest a lot of looters or violent people that are violently attacking protesters. Quite the contrary. And I'll get to that here in a minute. But, you're looking at the real unemployment numbers probably being close to 30% if you take out the military, right? So we've got like 30 million people unemployed. And then it's been years and decades of telling black and brown people to shut the fuck up. It's been decades of telling black and brown people, hey, you got it good. You live in America. And it's like that Chris Rock joke. If you're black or brown in this country, America's like that uncle that put you through college, but he molested you. And honestly, I'm not feeling very funny today, so I could have maybe sold that joke better, but I fucked up. Anyway, excuse me. And one would wonder why I don't edit this out. It's because I don't really care. This is an MSDNC. I can say do what the fuck I want. But for example, in recent years, Colin Kaepernick takes a knee and everybody loses their fucking mind. And, you know, he got banned from the NFL, and his, you know, the NFL defenders, or we don't have a racist problem in this country, goes, you know, to Kaepernick's numbers. Well, he was fading. He did it for publicity. Well, there was like 100 players plus that took a knee in the NFL. Eric Reed, not all of them had fading numbers. And who kept their job? Blake Bortles, RG3, they hadn't meant shit forever. Blake Bortles barely got into the playoffs once in his whole fucking career. He had a job. Andy Dalton, are you kidding? Like, I'm sorry, you know, and people can argue with me back and forth if they want to, but there's a ton of Mark Sanchez had a job for a long time, basically being third string after that great first season he had. And you're going to tell me with a straight face that Kaepernick's numbers were fading. So he did this as a publicity stunt. You know, I don't know who his publicist is, but they sure as fuck weren't thinking ahead. You know, the NFL is almost like fucking NASCAR as far as whiteness goes. And no, they like their players to be quiet and play football. But then the protesters are, you know, is one guy taking a knee peacefully? Fuck you. We don't want to hear about it. And then to make his protest for people to, with a straight face, this is where I don't want to even say disingenuous. You're being dumb on purpose at the very least, and at worst, you're lying. Because if you're going to tell me that Colin Kaepernick taking a knee is offensive because he's disrespecting the flag or disrespecting the military, well, that's like me getting caught with titty pictures on my phone, and my girlfriend catches those pictures, and instead of confronting the issue, I say, why are you spying on me? You shouldn't have been spying on me. I'm offended that you would even spy on me. How'd you get into my phone? Yeah, but I got caught doing something, didn't I? That's the kind of denial the average American that would say that's the level of denial. Kaepernick had military family members. Excuse me. He had said this over and over and over. He wasn't disrespecting anything. In fact, he consulted a Marine about the knee thing, because the first couple of games, he sat down on the bench, and the Marine said, you know what, taking a knee would be more respectful, and it might get people to understand exactly what you're doing. And it did. Got a lot of people to understand what he was doing. He wasn't just sitting there looking sullen. He respectfully took a knee. So did Eric Reed. So did a bunch of guys. But, you know, for his trouble, he was called a son of a bitch. And that, you know, but then flash forward, the protesters, after, you know, decades and centuries of this happy horse shit. And this isn't the first time they've protested. You know, everyone goes on about, quick side note, everyone goes on about Martin Luther King. You know, he protested peacefully. Yeah, he sure fucking did. And you know what happened? He got tear gassed. He got his house firebombed. He got stabbed once at a book signing. They finally shot him in the face when they killed him. They didn't just shoot him. They shot him in the face. Bullet went right through his face. So anyway. So basically you're saying that, you know, black lives don't fucking matter, right? You're saying to black and brown people, shut the fuck up. We don't want to hear it. And then, you know, I get these side things. Well, what about when people, you know, attack the police? Okay, you know what? If you want to make an omelet, you're going to break a few eggs. Revolutionary War, a little messy, if we recall. Shit got burned down. Okay, stuff got fired on because, you know, it was a war on our soil, and we fought the Brits, and the French helped us out. But these things are not without a cost. So here's an idea. If you don't want to pay the cost, quit fucking with people. There's a fucking idea. Quit fucking with people on the regular. Quit fucking with black and brown people. I got guys my age. I'm 56 years old. I got guys my age, black people, brown people, who do get fucked with. I got a buddy of mine, you know, he's got bursitis, for Christ's sake. I golf with him, shoot pool. You know, once or twice a month he gets stopped on the way home. Cops take his registration license and all of that. You know, he drives a Lexus. You know, he's in finance. He's not, you know, Little Caesar from the Crips, you know, bouncing up and down in a 64 blue Impala. He's just a regular guy driving home. Cops give him his credentials back. Yeah, we should make sure you live here. Well, why the fuck wouldn't he live here, asshole? And what kind of recruiting are we doing that we're not hiring guys with goddamn common sense? They can't look at someone in the face and at least kind of know. You know, maybe they bust a taillight, whatever, speeding, fine, write them up and let them go. But don't just stop people randomly because you feel like it. I wrote a piece for the Texas Free Press a few weeks back called Fire 'em All, Start Over. And I get into a lot of these fixes. We can actually fix this shit if people wouldn't kiss massive cop ass being a bunch of bootlickers to fascism and saying things like, well, no, they're great. We love our cops. You know what? No, we need a bunch of guys who actually have some balls. And I'm sorry, the quote, good cops. And I've been online a few times with this shit. And people go, well, my dad was a cop for 30 years and my brother did whatever. My question always comes back. Have they ever reported a bad cop and then they disappear? You know why? Because if you don't report a bad cop, you're a bad cop, period. And if I sound angry, it's because I fucking am. If you're not reporting bad cops, you're a goddamn bad cop. Understand that. If you witness jailhouse rapes or you witness jailhouse murders, Sandra Bland is still a fishy situation, and you don't report that, that's why cops either report stuff or they quit. Right? Otherwise, you end up getting shot in the face like Serpico. I saw an interview before this happened, about 4 months before this happened. I saw an interview with a guy on YouTube and digitized face and all the whole 9 yards, explaining that he ratted some guys out in the police force. And for the remaining 4 years of his career before he quit, he was afraid of being murdered. And why was he afraid of being murdered? Because that's what they did in that agency. So anytime they would go on a raid, he would always opt to take the rear and not lead or be in the middle, because he didn't want to end up like Pat Tillman, taking two in the back of the head. You can have a flak jacket on, it doesn't matter. You take two in the back of the head, that's the end of it. So he would always take up the rear in any raid. And he lived like that for 4 years. He was always worried about his house getting firebombed, or just all kinds of shit. And he finally just quit and moved his family. And I just find this amazing where you see these protests being so frowned upon. But with the so-called COVID protesters, remember those guys right before this happened? A bunch of white fucking skinheads walking up on the state capitals of Minnesota, Michigan, right? Threatening the lives of legislators, by the way, which is a felony assault. If you don't know the difference, assault and battery, assault is a threat. Battery is I touched you. So if you're feeling threatened, or I verbally threaten you, that's technically assault. Excuse me. And they did nothing. In fact, they got selfies with police. Everyone thought it was so cute, right? And I've said this on the last couple of episodes of The Bitter Truth, but if we do dig into these the state websites on Facebook, there's like over 100 of them. They all trace back to some right-wing Yahoo organization, whether it's the Heritage Foundation or the Door Brothers, who think the NRA are too liberal, or the Koch brother now, because the other guy died. But that's who's funding this shit. So it's not even a grassroots movement. It's an AstroTurf movement. It is fake. It's just completely fake. It's fraudulent, right? And you get these guys, these paid assassins, to go up on the state capitol. Not one thing fucking happens to them. Not one cop flashbangs them or throws tear gas at them. Nothing. They're threatening the lives of legislators in the state house, and nothing happens. So this is what we know, right? The protests are demanding change, right? So this is what we know. What now? Well, another thing, black on black crime just doesn't excuse filmed police violence. Chris Rock had a joke on his last special, Tambourine, where, yeah, that's fine. We need cops. I'm a big fan of, I hate the word defund the police because it makes it sound like you have no police. I'm a big fan of taking half their budgets in every city in this country and reallocating those resources to, say, child protective services, or, have a CPS worker show up to a domestic disturbance, have a cop with him or her as an escort. Problem solved, right? The cop is just standing there in case something gets weird, but he's not the guy to be de-escalating a domestic disturbance or checking to see if there really is violence, or if the lady's overreacting, or if the man's overreacting, right? Let the professional do that. Have the cop be an escort. Reduces the possibility of tensions escalating. And also too, when people do this black on black shit, like about 2 weeks ago, I guess there was this big shooting spree in Chicago. Black on black crime is up, so that means that police violence is okay. And I sidetracked myself from the Chris Rock joke, but little Ray Ray isn't sworn to protect and serve, right? The Crips and Bloods are not an agency of the taxpayer dime to protect and serve me. And this bullshit that we've gotten into, Jimmy Dore's made this point a million times, which I agree with, this bullshit that we've gotten into where the cop's job is to go home safe. No, the cop's job is to make sure I go home safe, right? And we don't train cops to de-escalate. If you've been watching these protest videos, I've seen, I don't know how many, cops are running people over. Cops are, assaulting people who do nothing. I see them not go after one looter. In fact, I've seen more than a handful of videos where cops dressed in riot gear are breaking windows and throwing fiery, incendiary devices into businesses. And they're not supposed to be recognized. They got a mask on or a gas mask on. So it's like, don't give me this shit that all cops are, there's a few bad apples. People always forget the expression. One bad apple spoils a whole bunch. A few bad apples rot the whole bunch. So if you've heard this math before, I'm sure already in this last month or so, but if you got 1,000 good cops and 10 bad cops and the 1,000 do nothing, you now have 1,010 bad cops. Sorry, I hate to burst your little fucking bubble. We've seen police. I mean, if you want to know how what domestic policy is going to be, just look at foreign policy and say, hey, 10 years from now, we're going to be like Honduras. 10 years from now, we're going to be like Nicaragua. And look at us now. We're like a glorified banana republic. We're buying a counterfeit Gucci handbag on a stolen fucking credit card. And we've seen, like I said, we've seen police not only, beating on protesters, but, beating on journalists, arresting journalists. What the fuck kind of country is this? We got First Amendment rights in this country. So suddenly now a journalist can't just report the news. They're getting arrested. Rubber bullets were not designed. I was in the West Bank, by the way, during the first Intifada. I saw the Israelis back then. This is when it was still kind of charming. Use rubber bullets. They didn't fire them at people. They fired them at the ground to bounce. And the idea was they would bounce and they still had a lot of velocity to them. They just didn't go through you or rip off a piece of your scalp or go into your eye and blind you. The idea was, with a rubber bullet is it's not like, oh, it's like a Nerf gun. Rubber bullets are hard and they do damage, but you minimize the damage, unlike bullets where you can actually shoot at the ground, they bounce up, and then they hit their intended targets or target. And the idea is that you're not trying to kill people. You're just trying to slow them down. And the idea is just slow them down. Hook them, book them, put them in the car. That's it. You don't beat the shit out of them and take your day out on them. And I'm sick and tired of every time one of these things happens, the first thing they do is they dig up the guy's record. Well, I heard he's beat his wife. I'm not about wife beating. I think that's a terrible thing, but I didn't know that was a death penalty in this country. Or, he hit a kid. Okay. Again, didn't know it was a death penalty in this country. He had a counterfeit $20 bill. Did not know that was a death penalty. Is that what we are now? The Philippines with Duterte, or whatever you say his name, who has a death penalty for drug cartel guys. They don't just convict them, they kill them. And he wants his law enforcement to be judge, jury, and executioner. He doesn't care if they Osama bin Laden their ass. Is that what we're becoming? Where due process is out the window, right? Where habeas corpus, which was suspended under Obama, which posse comitatus, which was suspended under Obama, which surveillance powers have been expanded since George Bush passed both Patriot Acts. Is that the country we are now? Or we're not going to ask any questions about this shit? This is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And we have to get to a situation where we are completely changing the narrative on how we expect police to behave. They're not, if they show empathy and compassion on an entrance exam, they should be hired, not turned away. And we got to get rid of this culture of permissiveness where cops are told to look the other way, or they want to look the other way because they're crooked themselves. But either way, we got to get rid of that. And we don't teach cops how to de-escalate. There's some good cops out there on the street who know how to do that. But I find that when people are black or brown, and statistics bear me out on this too, because most law enforcement, if you listen to my show with Mel Roberson a few weeks back, we got into this statistic. 30% of cops have a college degree. 50% have a 2-year degree or an equivalent, and 5% have a master's degree. And the numbers are staggering. The educated cops, which 85% of them are educated, have a 70% higher traffic stop rate. And when the average cop only makes one felony arrest a year, it's like, what are you stopping these people for? Well, a majority of the traffic stops are black and brown people. In the interest of transparency, I haven't been pulled out of a car since I was 19 years old. And that's because I lipped off to a cop. Since then,
My hands are on 10 and 2, quietly giving my license to registration. Don't want to make any attention because I'm going to fight the ticket. And if I don't pay attention, if I don't give any attention to myself, there's a 90% chance the cop won't show up a year and a half later after I defer the ticket. Now that I live in Texas, the laws are different. My lawyer actually can do something here. But I never make any trouble. I don't say a thing, right? So all of that to say, you guys, is we do need police reform. And if this is like kind of fucking with your layering and all that kind of stuff, and you kind of hang on to American exceptionalism by way of the police, I'm just simply saying this as a guy who just kind of cares about what's going on. And most of you listening are in that camp too, right? You can't defend this activity anymore. We got a problem. Digging up a white chick flipping off black cops isn't going to fix anything. It happened. Maybe she's an asshole. Who knows? And maybe the cops showed incredible restraint because they themselves were black, although I haven't seen a lot of black cops show restraint anyway. But all of that to say that you don't, that whole bullshit of two wrongs don't make a right. Totally true. But I find that people say that, never address the first wrong, right? I see everyone clutching their pearls over fucking Target and, God forbid, small business who can't afford to take the hits that Target has. But 90% of businesses have insurance. Right? They can't even lease their business unless they prove to the landlord they have insurance. So they're going to get made whole. George Floyd, still dead. Philando Castile, still dead. Freddie Gray, still dead. Eric Gardner, still dead. Tamir Rice, still dead. Dead. Now, if this isn't making a dent to you, but property damage is just freaking you the fuck out, well, then you're the problem. You're part of the systemic racism. Because you keep going to that all lives matter happy horse shit, which, of course, all lives matter. Who said they don't? The point the Black Lives Matter movement has been making for the last 7-8 years is that black and brown lives seem to matter less. Investigations go out the window. Another statistic no one likes to talk about. Like last year, we had like 1,000 police shootings. Not all of them are criminal. Like sometimes a guy, is shooting at cops as he's robbing the Circle K. That's going to happen. But of all the unarmed police shootings involving black and brown people, by that I mean the victim was unarmed, only 1% are ever tried. And they're tried at a grand jury hearing, where a lion's share of the time, they are going to seal the presentment. Now, in the Laquan McDonald case, which was egregious to say the least, fucking Rahm Emanuel, who was Obama's chief of staff, who became mayor of Chicago, sat on that video for 10 months. And the cop did the grand jury thing. And he's like, yeah, I was afraid for my life. And 10 months later, the video comes out. And Laquan McDonald was shown to be shot 16 times in the back as he was running away. Say that again, running away. He wasn't attacking them. He didn't come at him with a machete. He ran away, was running away. And they shot him 16 times. But the cop said he was in fear of his life. Well, that's bullshit. And as we wrap up, one of the things that I've really been hammering on online with my friends, a couple of articles I wrote for Texas Free Press, these multi-million-dollar settlements, because the McDonald family got a $5 million settlement from the city of Chicago. And it was settled, didn't go to court. Mayor Emanuel was smooth enough, I guess, or whoever the guy was that talked the family into staying out of court. Because I'm sure if your peers is going to see that video and go, oh, here's $100 million. And, frankly, cities can't afford that, but they can sure as hell afford $5 million. But that's taxpayer money, guys. So what I'm saying is you take it out of the police pension fund. And, we can't legislate a person's heart. I know that. I'm not stupid, right? We're not going to make racism go away, but we could punish the fuck out of it. So if, for example, that $5 million was coming out of the police pension fund, I don't care who you are as a cop. The guy that was working with Derek Chauvin that day might have tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, man, you can back off a little bit. This guy can't breathe, right? The guy could have been in the KKK and, he wears a hood 6 nights a week and, he bangs his own sister 7 times a day on Sunday. I don't give a shit. He will suddenly get made more moral because I'm going to tax his ass for it. So if he sees his pension is going to get reduced because of one of his knothead idiot friends, then you're going to see some real change. Like I said, I can't legislate a person's heart, right? You hate. That's just who you are. I get it. I'm not stupid. However, if I'm going to take it out of your ass, and by that I mean money, then you can see some systemic change. And I mean up and down the line. You punish people monetarily and stuff starts to change. The cops don't have to like anybody, right? But if they're going to calm the fuck down, and then we change the recruiting practices so that we're not hiring a bunch of roided out dipshits. For example, if you fought in war, you can't be a cop. And I mean fight in a war, not peeling potatoes in the green zone, right? I'm talking about you were in Tikrit, you were in Kabul, right? You fought in Afghanistan, Libya, name it. You've been in some theaters, and you watched your buddies getting blown up by an IED, or or you almost lost a limb and saved it. And now you're whole physically anyway, and now you're going to be a cop. I'm sorry, they're called flashbacks for a reason. So no, you can't be a cop. Maybe you could work a desk. Maybe you could be the HR guy, right? Excuse me, internal investigations. But you can't be a cop, not on the street anyway. And we got a lot of those guys. So that being said, my friends, we'll start wrapping this up. As always, appreciate your time, appreciate your support. I try not to be angry. I like to do the annoyed ranting thing, but I know I probably gritted my teeth a couple of times in righteous indignation. Fuck it, who cares? But as we wrap up the show, if you listen, if you like what you've been hearing last couple of years, support the show. Patreon.com/The Bitter Truth. Like I said, this summer we're introducing a new tier, and you can catch us on all the usual suspects: Spotify, Podcast Addict, YouTube, iTunes, all of it. We're everywhere. We're live and international. So, and that's about it, my friends. And if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.